Hello, everybody. Welcome to our ADA Master Class. We will be discussing the ADA compliance, specifically for bottle fillers and drinking fountains today. So, thank you very much for your attendance, for being here, and for educating yourselves on the subject. Keep in mind as I move through the presentation that the requirements that I'm about to cover and apply to many types of equipment, okay, not just drinking fountains, but again, that is our focus today. Also, consider that you all have your own state and local laws that must be adhered to. So ensure that those are taken into consideration as well. State and local standards must be more strict than what is currently in place at the federal level, which is what we're digging into today, the federal standard for compliance. My name is Justin Dunn. I'm the field marketing manager here at Haws. I have been presenting on and educating people on the ADA and ANSI standards for um, uh, bottle fillers, fountains, and safety equipment now for going on 8 years. So thank you for being here. We really appreciate it. And then with me, Hayden, if you want to say hi.
Yeah, hello everybody. I'm Hayden Delgado. I'm a specification manager here at Haws, and I've been with Haws for about 6 years and looking forward to another great ADA webinar today. Thank you all for joining.
And then really quickly, you are probably going to have questions during the webinar. To post questions, use the button at the top right-hand corner of your screen. It's a little box with a question mark on it. That is the questions section. We'll be poking in and out of there in the back of the webinar and making sure that we are answering them as quickly as we can, but we'll have a whole section at the end. Hayden and I will stay over a bit and answer questions that are submitted during the webinar. Okay, so there's a little question box down there at the end. Just throw it in there and we'll see it pop up and we'll try to get to it as we're presenting. Any questions we don't get to will still be answered though. So we will put together a document that has the questions, the answers, and we will send that in a follow-up email to you. We're also going to launch poll questions during the presentation. Uh, this really helps us to improve this product and to improve our products and how we move forward as a company. So we really appreciate your participation in those. They mean a lot to us, and we'll be launching those incrementally throughout the webinar. Also, so that follow-up email, it's going to be sent about 24 to 48 hours after the presentation, and it's going to include the on-demand recording for the webinar. So you'll have a link, you can follow it, you can rewatch, you can share, you can do whatever you want to do with it. It'll include the presentation slides, so you don't have to furiously take notes if you don't want to. You can have a PDF copy of the slides to reference, which we hope is going to be useful for you. Additional support materials, CEU instructions, right? So you can get credit. That's through ABIH, AIA, IFMA, and ASPE. We also have an attendance certificate if you want one of those. And then the Q&A and questions and answers. We'll have an Excel spreadsheet put together for you that Hayden and I will figure out after the presentation. Now, with that, I want to really quickly touch on who we are as a company, a bit about us, and then after the agenda, we'll talk a little bit about the ADA and its origins. But for now, I want to talk about Luther Haws. Luther Haws invented the world's first sanitary drinking fountain, Bubblerhead, in 1906. And he is our founder here at Haws. And he did that, his invention, during and amidst the ban the cup movements in the early 1900s, and formed the Haws Sanitary Drinking Fountain Company officially in 1909 in Berkeley, California. Luther, he had been working as a sanitation inspector for Berkeley, California, when he had the thought to invent a device that would prevent users from spreading germs and disease through public hydration, which was a big issue at the time. And that device was the drinking fountain Bubblerhead. Prior to Luther, Haws and his invention, It was very commonplace to see public fountains, and they would have like constant running water, which isn't so uncommon in the rest of the world today. You can still find fountains like that, but you'd stop and drink from a cup attached to the fountain via the chain attached to the fountain, and you'd fill it up at the fountain, which was the preferred method pre 1900s, because nobody believed in the silly notion that there were small microscopic germs and viruses that we were sharing via our mouths and saliva. They thought it was ridiculous. So this had obvious public sanitation issues. Some of the common diseases being spread at the time were like cholera, typhoid fever, dysentery, all of which at the time were potentially fatal. Spread from mouth to cup to mouth, and lucky for us, Luther put his mind to the task and he found a solution that has continued to benefit public health and safety to this day. And fun fact, his invention was actually, his prototype was the brass bedpost from his bed. Um, Haws was also responsible, us as a company, for developing the first electric water coolers back when they were still dropping off daily ice blocks to cool the water. We also had the first line of standardized accessible fountains for wheelchair use, and we even pioneered the bottle filler category back when nobody cared, right? So, and now you can't throw a rock without hitting a job that has bottle fillers on it. Everybody wants a bottle filler along with their drinking fountains, and it's incredibly popular now. So we've had a very long history with hydration and public sanitation and safety that we are incredibly proud of here at Haws. We're currently located in Sparks, Nevada. That's where our home facility is, where we're presenting from right now, and where we work tirelessly to improve the health and safety of our global community. Now, today's agenda includes the overview of the ADA legislation for drinking fountains, common ADA installation issues, that one's fun, ADA compliant drinking fountain and bottle filler installations, hygienic hydration solutions, and then we'll end with questions, answers, information, and things like that. Now, really quickly, as we get into the legislation, what I want to point out is that this is, and is very important to remember, that it's civil rights legislation, right? The ADA legislation was the first major legislation to treat disability rights as a civil rights issue. Prior to this standard, and its inception, accessibility was up to the business. They could choose to do whatever they wanted to do, and it was very infrequently available. People didn't want to spend money to update their businesses and thought that your disability was your problem. And I'm sure if you looked up old images, you would probably see that on a sign somewhere. There were no teeth in any former requirements to provide access to buildings and grounds for an entire class of people that were being neglected. But thanks to people like Justin Dart, that's the gentleman in the spiffy hat there in both of the photos on the top. Justin Dart was the former head of Dart Industries, a company responsible for Duracell, Tupperware, and eventually merging with Kraft. He was one of the biggest advocates for the movement and is often referred to as the father or grandfather of the ADA, as he himself was disabled and protested alongside everybody else. And then alongside fellow advocates and Mr. George H.W. Bush, who was the sitting president that signed the ADA into law on July 26, 1990. The new act granted reasonable accommodations to people with disabilities and prohibited discrimination based on those disabilities. It's a very cool story, and it would be hard to believe now, but they were met with very strong resistance to these proposed changes. And Dart went on to found the President's Committee on Employment of People with Disabilities to combat pushes to weaken the ADA from advocates that would surprise you. And maybe some that wouldn't surprise you. But there were protests and counter protests. They had demonstrations like the Capitol Crawl, where about 60 demonstrators, they like abandoned their wheelchairs, crawled up the steps of the Capitol to show its inaccessibility, and then demanded to speak with the Speaker of the House. The young lady there at the bottom in the bandana, that's Jennifer Keelan Chaffin. She was 8 years old at the time. Cerebral palsy was her disability. and famously said, "I'll take all night if I have to." She still advocates and speaks about her involvement in the movement and has a great kids book about it as well. In another instance, I think in the funniest one ever, while protesting the Transportation Association, because up in Canada, they were going through the exact same thing, and they were protesting the Canadian Transportation Association. The police showed up to arrest the protesters, but in a very funny and ironic twist, they didn't have accessible paddy wagons, and they had to go get accessible school buses to transport them into custody, which just further drove home the point, which was actually pretty funny in my opinion. And then lastly, with fresh ink needed to seal the deal, that's the photo of HW signing the bill into law alongside Evan Kemp, who was the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission chairman, and then Justin Dart there on his right, who was at the time the chairman for the Committee on Employment of People with Disabilities. And he even wrote a nice little note there at the bottom. And that will bring us to poll question number 1, and then we'll dig into it.
Hi, everybody. So for our first poll question, we're asking, what are you looking to obtain from this webinar? Basic ADA compliance guidance, product recommendations, touchless hygienic solutions, or CEU credit? So I'll give you a second to answer.
It's kind of looking like all of the above.
Yeah. And it looks like you're all pretty close to end, so I'm going to go ahead and end this poll.
Awesome. So moving on, that's going to bring us into the Americans with Disability Act 28 CFR Part 36, Title 3, regarding public accommodations in commercial facilities and its requirements. These are enforced by none other than the Department of Justice. Title 3 is going to be our entire focus today. The following are the key sections of the standard pertaining to drinking fountains and their compliance. Remember that we're going to send these out in slides to everybody so you can reference them later. And quickly remember that Title II covers state and local government, and Title I has more to do with anti-discrimination of disabled employees. Remember also that this is based on an ANSI standard, A117.1, and the standard protects people well beyond those with an inability or with difficulty walking, right? Sensory impairment, extremes of physical size, reaching, manipulation disabilities are just some of the other examples of disabilities that the legislation protects, and really all aimed at the goal of universal access and design, which is the main purpose behind this. Now, I want to kick this off by talking about Section 36.403, which gives us a list of priorities when making alterations to provide accessibility to a facility. And you're going to notice that in this list, drinking fountains is up there on the list with accessible parking, the entrance route, restrooms, public telephones, fountains, as well as parking, storage, and alarms are all high priority items. These are basic human necessities, right, when navigating the world. All people everywhere need water. It's at the tippy top of the list of things we need to survive, and we need to ensure that it is accessible to everybody. Now, Chapter 1, Section 102 just tells us that this document contains both adult and children's requirements based on anthropometrics, which is a fancy word for measurements and capabilities of the human body. Children are defined as age 12 or younger in the ADA. Chapter 2 explains where there is one fountain, typically a high side fountain, that there must be two fountains. Okay? Local building codes determine the number of drinking fountains that must be installed based on occupancy, right, per capita. This simply states that there must be a high fountain and a low fountain. What most people don't realize is that the low side fountain is not the only one that's designed for people with disabilities. The high side fountain is also a disabled accessible fountain designed for those with bending and stooping disabilities. Okay, and that may be a walker, cane, crutches, and these people may not be physically able to utilize the low side fountain due to a bending or stooping disability. So other than aesthetics, drinking fountains really aren't designed for able-bodied people. It's reasonable to assume that if you are able-bodied, you could drink from whichever fountain you choose. So if you are installing a single fountain in your facility or in a park, you must satisfy this requirement and install a second fountain. They don't even need to be next to each other. They can be separated or on either side of a hallway, etc., as long as they are present and easily accessible. Now, 211.3, this is called the 50-50 rule. That's an easy way to remember. And simply states that half of the units installed need to be high fountains and the other half need to be low fountains. So if you were installing 6 new fountains in your building, you couldn't do 4 high and 2 low. You would need to do 3 and 3, 3 high, 3 low. The exception to this rule is where the number of fountains yields a fraction, right? And another example, given this requirement, we will assume that you have met the minimum number of drinking fountains for the property and you've decided to add an additional drinking fountain, okay, giving you 7 total fountains. The 7th fountain can be high or low. It's entirely up to you. So long as you have 3 high, 3 low, you've met the 50-50 rule, and the minimum number of fountains is required, you can do whatever you want with that last fountain because it's above and beyond what is required for the facility. In Chapter 3, we start getting into dimensional and mechanical elements. You're going to hear me use the term elements a few times throughout the presentation. An element is whatever the device is that we're giving access to. Okay, that could be a drinking fountain, fire extinguisher, baby changing table. Many of the measurements that we're going to cover apply to a lot more than just fountains, as I mentioned earlier. And that it includes a wide array of different things. Now, this is one of the most important measurements to remember, and very frequently the section that's being violated in tear-outs and reinstalls. 305.3 and 305.4 detail clear ground space to accommodate the wheelchair underneath the fountain, okay? Allowing an approach that's unobstructed to the fountain. You must provide a 30-inch by 48-inch space of clearance underneath the element, which is just larger than your typical adult-sized wheelchair, giving the user access and clear space for the wheelchair and for their hands too on either side to maneuver the wheelchair into the space that's been provided. Okay, so very important. And again, just based on your average adult-sized wheelchair is what that space was determined by. Now, in this example, this clearly demonstrates that clear ground space in front of the element. So in this case, we have a telephone and a fire extinguisher. 305.5 just explains that the positioning of that clear ground space, allowing for either a forward approach, like the one you see on the left, or the parallel approach, as you see on the right. That space has to be provided for either. Those are the two different main approaches from a wheelchair to the element, forward or parallel. Parallel being the preference for children's height, but we'll get into that later. Now remember that these measurements are bare minimum requirements. The more space you can provide, the better. When the element is in an alcove, like in the examples above, wheelchair users are going to need additional space to maneuver. Okay, and the clear floor space changes based on both the depth of the alcove and the type of approach that we are attempting. So in our first example, our 30 by 48 inches becomes 36 by 48 inches when the depth of that alcove exceeds 24 inches. And in the second example, for a parallel approach, if you can imagine the type of approach and how you'd have to approach that from a wheelchair, when the depth of that alcove exceeds 15 inches, then our clear floor space must be 30 by 60 inches. Okay, so wider space to maneuver into. So more and more states are requiring the use of alcoves, and it just makes sense for these elements to be out of the path of travel, really. And you'll see more and more and more alcoves. It's really just the way we do things now, but they're not required everywhere. Now, from that clear floor space that we talked about, extending up, we have this defined toe and knee clearance. Okay, so try to think of this clear area that we previously defined as a three-dimensional space that extends up. Okay, our toe clearance is 9 inches from the ground to the bottom of the element, and our knee clearance is 27 inches from the ground up to the bottom of the bowl or the leading edge of the element. Obstructions in the yellow highlighted area on the screen there are another really unfortunate common compliance issue. You can't use this space. Okay, and we've got some great examples coming up that we've kind of found out in the wild that we'll show you. And this space underneath has to be clear, and that includes any space between the victim's knees too, right? The like P traps. It's a little dated, but hanging phone books and anything else you can think of. But that space is completely unusable underneath the unit or element. Okay, and that brings us to poll question number 2.
All right, for your second poll question, we'd like to know how important is filtered water to you and or your clients? Extremely important, very important, somewhat important, not at all important, or not sure.
Having worked at Haws for so long, I can spot them pretty easy. So I always have a bottle with me, and I always try to find me some filtered water when I'm in public.
Gonna end
Thank
that there.
you. Thank you for your participation in that, everybody. We really appreciate it. It really does help us out. Now, 307, protruding objects. What this is um, primarily in place to protect another type of protected class that we really haven't touched on yet, and that class is visually impaired. Okay, elements may only protrude into a walkway so much, and they have to be located at certain heights, whether they're in an alcove or not. It doesn't matter. So this is to prevent anyone with a complete or partial loss of sight from running into those elements. So objects with their leading edge or the lowest point on the front of the element above 27 inches may only protrude a maximum of 4 inches into the path of travel. But so long as the leading edge of the element is at or under 27 inches, then this is considered to be detectable by what you would be using, which is a detection cane, according to the Department of Justice. Okay, so quick example here. We've got our visually impaired buddy here navigating a hallway. On the bottom right, we see an object very similar in some ways to a drinking fountain. And so long as its leading edge is at or below the 27-inch line, it can be detected through the use of a detection cane. So, and early enough to be avoided and to help prevent potential injury, right? So this fountain and any element, so long as it's meeting the 27-inch requirement, can protrude any amount into this space because it's detectable. The same rule applies for elements at or above 80 inches from the floor. Okay, now this is considered headroom clearance, and similar to the previous example, can extend any amount into the space. On the left, we have a different object that is sitting above 27 inches and below 80 inches, smack dab in the middle, and therefore may not protrude into the space any more than 4 inches. Okay, think of like fire extinguishers, how they have a little cabinet that can't extend out further than 4 inches. Now there's an exception, and that's handrails. Handrails are allowed to protrude as much as 4.5 inches as an included exception. They get a little extra space, a little bump. Now I'm going to use the 1011 HPS and the SK3 cane skirt here for the next example. This is it's a dual high-low unit typically installed in your high traffic customer facing areas because of it's shiny and it looks great. And it's a great example of what your typical high-low ADA installation looks like out in public. The SK3 cane skirt is what we need to discuss here. Now, where drinking fountains can't be alcoved out of the path of travel, a cane skirt it must be used to lower the leading edge of the high side fountain to 27 inches to also make that side detectable, right? Because you might be coming from either direction. So when using a detection cane, if you're unassisted, you are generally following a shoreline or the outermost edge of a space. And since the visually impaired may need to detect something on either side of the room, they may be traveling in either direction. And without the cane skirt in place, there will likely be incidents where people will run into the high side fountain or they'll have a difficult time finding or detecting it, which is why we use the cane skirt. Many states still don't fully utilize alcoves, and until they do, cane skirts are the answer to this issue. Although many places don't use cane skirts either, but they should be. Now, Section 308. This brings us to reach range requirements. Okay, another important consideration when something like a bottle filler is installed, or when things like baby changing stations are put in place. The slide's pretty straightforward. If your reach is unobstructed completely, like in the photo on the left, then you have a 48-inch max and 15-inch minimum reach range. Okay, whatever you're accessing can be within that area. Any buttons, handles, sensors, etc., must be located within that range. But as soon as we introduce an obstruction, our reach ranges are diminished, right? So when an object shorter than 20 inches is in place, we keep our 48-inch high reach range, but our lower reach range disappears since we now have the fountain or a similar element in place. When reaching over an object that is 20 to 25 inches, our reach range is shortened to only 44 inches. Which makes sense, of course. Generally speaking, drinking fountains are shorter than 20 inches. So the middle example will be what our reach ranges are going to be, in this example anyways, for fountains or bottle fillers. So remember, we want to make things as easy as possible and not create a challenge for the user. The middle example makes reaching a button, lever, sensor, etc., behind the fountain or on the fountain easily accessible because it's so short. And bottle fillers are usually on the wall or just above the fountain, and etc. So we have to keep them within that area. Now, this DOJ advisory that's included defines reach ranges for children based on age. Okay, remember children are defined as 12 and under in the ADA, and these are all ranges that apply to both forward and parallel approach to an element. So starting on the left, ages 3 and 4, 36 inches to 20 inches, ages 5 to 8, 40 inches to 18 inches, and then ages 9 to 12, 44 inches high, 16 inches low. And that's because children grow at different ranges, but this gives guidance to facilities that might be catering to the different ages, and they can ensure that the high reach range and low reach range are within the min and max. Now in Chapter 6, we get into the specifics regarding plumbing elements and their measurements. First, 602.2 covers clear floor space and the necessity to have that clear floor space centered on the unit, right? Not on the alcove or the space that you built for the element. This is for a forward approach as well as a parallel approach, and it needs to be set up differently. Obviously, our toe and knee clearance must also still be available, right? There is an exception included here for parallel approaches to children's use units, allowing a parallel approach so long as the bubbler or spout is at a certain height and a certain depth. Knee and toe clearance begins to diminish pretty quickly as we lower fountains for children's use. So the use of a parallel approach is a very important option to have for them, especially considering that children use wheelchairs that can vary wildly in size and can sometimes even be adult wheelchairs, right? Custom sized wheelchairs can be expensive, and it can be pretty quickly outgrown. So a parallel approach really helps to allow access to a wide variety of different types of equipment they might be using. Now here's a really good illustration showing that clear floor space I just mentioned and how it needs to be centered on the element itself. So as far as the fountain goes, it's perfectly centered on the fountain, which is our focus. Since the clear floor space is intended for the wheelchair user, it's centered on the left low side fountain. And since there's no real floor space defined in black and white for the high side, the floor space for the low side fountain can spill over underneath the high side fountain as much as is needed. Okay, so and many people make the mistake of centering the clear floor space on the alcove, which can lead to expensive tearouts and reinstalls. Now on the high side, there is a generally agreed upon space, but Hayden's going to cover that here in a little bit. Now here you can see we have a total, let's see here, width of 48 inches on this alcove, wall to wall. It isn't deeper than 24 inches, so we don't need to expand on our 30-inch clear floor space. You will notice, though, that this shows a separate measurement for California. California has gone above and beyond. They have above and beyond the standard requirements, and they mandated an additional 2 inches of floor space. So bumping up the width of our floor space to 32 total width inches. So long as the state requirements, again, go above and beyond the federal standards, they can supersede them. So centering the fountain is not mandatory, by the way, so keep that in mind. It does make the installation look aesthetically pleasing in the alcove, but in no way do you have to put the fountains dead center in the alcove, right? Now, if the alcove was deeper than 24 inches, remember that we would need a total of 36 inches of ground clearance to allow for more maneuverability in and out of the space on a forward or parallel approach. For California, we have our 32 inches and our 30 inches elsewhere, centered on the low side fountain. Center line to center line, these fountains are separated by 16 inches, which is standard for Haws, which means we need an additional 16 inches of space on either side of the fountains from the center lines of those fountains total to meet our 32-inch minimum for California and a slightly smaller space for most other states. So since there are no obstructions under the high side fountain, our primary concern is that wall. Remember, if it's at all intruding into our floor space, the alcove would need to be redesigned or the fountain would need to be shoved over so that the high side fountain is closer to the alcove wall, giving us our clear floor space on the low fountain. Okay, so it'll leave it a little off center, but you'll be compliant, right? Or we just design a larger alcove. We should also remember, again, that high side is for those with disabilities. They may need the space for walkers, crutches, canes, and etc. Like we can't make it too tight, right? Otherwise, they may have difficulty accessing it. But again, Hayden will cover that clear floor space here in a little while. And that brings us to poll question number 3, and Hayden's going to take over from here.
Hi there. So for our third poll question, how often do you recommend, specify, purchase a drinking fountain with a bottle filler attached? 75% of the time or greater, 50 to 74%, 25 to 49%, 1% to 24%, or 0%. I'm going to leave this open for a minute so you guys can get all your numbers in there, please. All right, thank you.
All right, Hayden, it is all you, buddy.
Yeah, thank you, Justin. So here we have a excerpt from the California Building Code, which did make it mandatory to locate all drinking fountains in an alcove or with wing walls. California is not the only state to do this. That's why we bring it up today. Other states have started to move forward with this as well. Those states include Texas, Connecticut, and Georgia. And the reason for this is to make sure that we're removing the drinking fountains from any pedestrian walkways. We want them to be out of the path of travel for several reasons, but mainly so that those that are visually impaired are not going to be bumping into them. It's not going to be causing a hazard. And those drinking fountains must be, or those alcoves with the drinking fountains, must be a minimum of 32 inches deep by 18 inches deep by 32 inches wide. And the wing walls, if you can't put an alcove in place, you can put wing walls in place to act as an alcove. Those wing walls must stick out at least as far as the leading edge of the drinking fountain and to within 6 inches of the floor vertically. And Justin, it looks like I'm having trouble advancing the slides here. There we go. So let's get into the fun part of this, my favorite part, looking at how not to install these drinking fountains. And we are going to be looking at a few examples, and then we're going to be looking at how to install them properly. So starting off with how not to do it. Here's our first example. This is two high-low drinking fountains that were installed in an alcove in an airport. There is two problems with these high-low units, but before I get into the issues, the high-low unit on the right-hand side is actually fully compliant. There are no problems with that unit. Both of our problems come from the unit on the left-hand side. The first problem that we have is our drinking fountain. That low side drinking fountain on the left hand side is installed just too close to the wall. Because of that, we do not have our 30 by 48 inches of clear floor space centered under that unit. We need to move that unit further from the wall. The easiest way of switching that would probably be to swap the two fountain heights, put that low side unit in the center. Therefore, it'd have that 30 inches of width, clear floor space centered under it without being obstructed by the wall. The second problem that we have is our bottle filler. The bottle filler in this example is installed above the high side drinking fountain, and that is putting the activator above our maximum high reach range of 48 inches. Therefore, we need to take that bottle filler and lower it down. Most likely, we're going to throw it on one of the low side drinking fountains, which is a requirement as well. I'll bring that up in our last piece of legislation later, talking specifically about bottle fillers, but we do need that on the low side unit. Here we have another ADA installation issue. This one isn't even close to being right. They put it above the high-low unit as a whole. It's centered on that unit. It's well above our 48 inches of maximum high reach range. Because of that, we need to take out this bottle filler. It needs to be torn out and redesigned. We got to put it somewhere else as a standalone bottle filler, or we need to put something that's going to sit a little bit lower to that low side drinking fountain and within our reach ranges. So these are all issues that we want to keep in mind whenever we're doing bottle filler or drinking fountain installations. For these two examples, I like to say that they got it half right. They did put it above our low side drinking fountain. However, it is still well above our maximum high reach range. That table that Justin showed earlier, or the three diagrams, that 48 inches of maximum high reach range. These two bottle fillers are installed way too high. They need to be installed as a standalone somewhere else, or a lower bottle filler that sits right above that low side drinking fountain like you typically see in public areas. Here we have one of the most common ADA installation issues, which is the drinking fountains being installed at a improper height. So we have a cascading design here with three drinking fountain heights. They are meant to be at a children's height for the lowest unit. Then we want a wheelchair ADA accessible height in the middle. And then at the very top, we want a standalone ADA drinking fountain for people with standing or stooping disabilities. However, these drinking fountains are just installed out of order. That cascading design, we get it. It's very eye pleasing. There's a proper way of doing that. This is not it. And the reason for that is our standalone drinking fountain is meant to be installed at a children's height, not at a standing or stooping disabilities height in this example. And our high-low drinking fountain, which is meant for standing or stooping disabilities or wheelchair accessibility height for those two fountain heights, we have it installed at a children's height and a wheelchair accessible drinking fountain height. Now, the issue with that comes from not having enough room in between those two units to have our clear floor space to what in this example would be the wheelchair accessible drinking fountain. So we would need to rearrange some of these units to get it to match up to the proper heights. we're going to take our high-low unit that's currently on the left, we're going to move it up and to the right, putting it at our ADA wheelchair accessible height and our standing or stooping disabilities height. Then we're going to take that standalone drinking fountain on the right, drop it down to the far left and far enough away from that high-low unit so it can be at a children's height without getting into that clear floor space for our low side unit. So we will be looking at an example of that coming up shortly of the correct measurements for how you want to space out those units. Here we have an ADA installation issue with an outdoor drinking fountain. This one is a Haws 3300 FR. It's a freeze resistant unit, but it's installed just too close to a wall. And the reason for that is this style of outdoor drinking fountain is very common, where you have to have that forward clear floor space approach going to the unit, as we know, as Justin talked about, showed examples of. But the clear floor space forward approach to this unit is coming from two different angles. You have a forward approach for the high side unit going towards the wall, and then our forward approach for the low side unit is actually going alongside the wall to access drinking water. And because of that, this unit is installed too close to the wall, and we don't have that 30 inches of clear floor space width being centered under that unit. So now let's go through and look at some ADA compliant drinking fountain and bottle filler installations. We're going to look at a few of those examples that we just showed and now showing how to properly install them. So as we do that, let's start off with reviewing some legislation on the children's height drinking fountains. So if we go back and revisit section 602.2, it told us that children's height drinking fountains have to have a bubbler head that has a maximum height of 30 inches to that spout. It also told us that that bubbler head cannot be any more than 3.5 inches back from the front edge of the unit. And then it told us that we can forego our 27 inches of knee and 9 inches of toe clearance because that fountain is going to be lowered down to children's height. And I see a few questions coming in right now, so I'm just going to reiterate this one more time because I don't have a chance to type while I'm speaking as well to answer the questions in the question chat. But that toe clearance is 9 inches, as I just said, for a standard ADA drinking fountain, and the knee clearance is 27 inches. So keep that in mind for the examples that we're going through. But for children's height, we can forego that 27 inches of knee clearance, 9 inches of toe clearance. And the reason for that is we're lowering down that unit. But many state and local codes say that you have to have a specific toe and knee clearance. It's not described in the ADA, so you need to check your local codes for that. And the ADA also tells us that for children's height drinking fountains, we can have a parallel approach. It doesn't only have to be a forward approach like it does for adult fountains. But again, local and state codes, many of them call for a forward approach. So check up on your local codes anytime you're working with those child height drinking fountains. For some examples with the children's height units, I'm going to be using the wide enamel cast iron drinking fountains, our standalones, and our high lows. So these will be the dimensions that I use on the next example. The reason for that, they're very common in schools still. It's the most common place you see these, but that wide enamel cast iron is a little bit more sanitary. It's easier to clean. It doesn't absorb heat. We know that kids often lean on drinking fountains when they're using them. And if they're out in sunlight, that stainless steel can get hot. And just like your white enamel cast iron bathtub at home, this type of unit is going to be very durable. It's going to last a long time. So in this example, we have that cascading design that I showed earlier that was installed out of order. Now we're going to look at the correct measurements of how to do this properly. Here we have our child's height drinking fountain at the proper height. It's got that bubbler head, that spout below the 30 inches maximum. We have 27 inches of knee clearance under our wheelchair ADA accessible unit. And then the key measurement here is that 22 inches from the center line of those two units to each other. That 22 inches is important because it's going to give us 15 inches from the center of our ADA wheelchair accessible drinking fountain to the front leading edge of our children's height drinking fountain, therefore giving us 30 inches centered under that unit. We need to make sure we have that 30 inches of clear floor space centered under the unit. That clear floor space can go under our high side unit because it's above our 27 inches of knee clearance, but we need to make sure there's no obstructions in that clear floor space. Now we're going to look at those outdoor drinking fountains. I showed the example earlier with that green unit. It had the clear floor space forward approach from the two different angles. It was installed too close to a wall. For this example, I'm going to be using the Haws 3150. This unit is a concrete unit. It's very typical in outdoor spaces, especially in playground use. We see it because that arm on that unit can be installed at either an ADA wheelchair accessible or children's height. It is adjustable and it still has that forward approach from the two different angles, that very common style that I talked about. So it's a good example for the next few slides where we're going to be talking about how to install these properly with the ADA in mind. So for this type of unit, the key measurement is again 15 inches from the center of the drinking fountain bowl to the wall. That 15 inches is going to give us our 30 inches of clear floor space centered under the unit, and that is going to give us our 48 inches as well. We need to make sure that we have that. And then here we have our first example of the clear floor space that is required for our high side drinking fountains. We talked about that there is a sufficient amount of space that is generally accepted. That is 30 by 30 inches for that high side drinking fountain. It just has to be in front of the unit. It doesn't go underneath the unit like our low side drinking fountain. But we need to make sure that we're providing that amount of clear floor space to allow people that are using walkers or canes or crutches to easily access these drinking fountains without any obstructions in those areas. For outdoor units, we also need to make sure that we are providing a hard scope pad installed underneath these units and around the unit to fully enclose our clear floor space. So we need a hard scope pad. Usually this is going to be a concrete pad or some type of hard rubber surface, but it's got to enclose that 30 by 48 inches for the low side drinking fountain and that 30 by 30 inches for our high side drinking fountain. Now there are other fountains. I'll show an example that kind of minimizes this amount of clear floor space. It makes that concrete pad a little bit smaller, saving on installation costs. And I'll show an example of that unit coming up. But this is your typical area that you're going to need to provide. It's going to be about 69 inches by 52 inches to enclose all of that clear floor space. Now, if we're installing these units with wing walls, we need to make sure those wing walls are sticking out at least as far as the leading edge of the drinking fountain. So here it's going to be 39 inches long. You see it sticking out right to the edge of that low side drinking fountain. And we also need to make sure that it's wide enough to enclose our clear floor space. So here we have that clear floor space at 30 by 30 and 30 by 48 all enclosed. Those wing walls aren't cutting into that area at all. And we have our path of travel in an area where you can easily get in and access that drinking fountain using the clear floor space as well. So here we have a quick lineup of some ADA compliant outdoor drinking fountains. We have a whole product line of these. These are just some of the top models or the most common models that you see. That unit on the far right is the one that I was talking about, where it can make that hard scope pad that you're installing a little bit smaller. The reason for that is you can adjust the drinking fountain and bottle filler heads on there to have them all front facing if you would like. You'd have the maintenance panels all front facing as well. That way you can have only forward approach these units rather than that ADA front approach clear floor space coming from the different angles. All right, so here's our last piece of legislation for the day. With this, we are going to be talking about the ADA and where exactly it comes from. So the 2010 ADA standards come from the ANSI standards. And in 2017, ANSI posted a revision. That revision was the A117.1-2017. One of the things that was included in that revision or that update was the addition of bottle filling stations to the section 602 heading of drinking fountains. Now, the key word here is addition. The reason for that is bottle filling stations cannot replace a required drinking fountain. I'm going to say that a few times throughout the rest of the presentation because we really want to hammer that home. We see a lot of ADA issues nowadays with people doing exactly that. Bottle filling stations cannot replace your required drinking fountains. You still have to meet your minimum number of required drinking fountains, and they have to be those high-low drinking fountains. Bottle fillers are only an addition. Not everybody has access to a bottle or a cup. We need to make sure that we're providing clean drinking water to all people. So we need to still have our minimum number of drinking fountains. Now, if you have extra drinking fountains, more than your job requires, more than your local codes and the ADA require, then you can replace those extra drinking fountains with bottle fillers. Other than that, bottle fillers are just added as an addition. Bottle fillers do have their own ADA compliance requirements too. So you still have to have that 30 by 48 inches of clear floor space centered on bottle fillers. If you're installing a bottle filler on a drinking fountain, it must be installed on the low side drinking fountain. Once you add one to the low side, you're then free to also add one to the high side, but you can never have a bottle filler on a high side drinking fountain and not on the low side. If you're installing it on the drinking fountain, it also has to be within your 48 inches of maximum reach range as well. It does have to have a forward approach if it's on a drinking fountain. If you have a standalone bottle filler, it is a little unique in the fact that it can have a parallel or forward approach. So that's just for standalone bottle fillers. And all bottle fillers must be either hand operated or automatic. For Haws, we have two options for this. We have our push button for the hand operated option, or we have our touchless sensor for the automatic option. So we are going to now move forward with this and looking at some examples of how to properly install bottle fillers. I'm going to be using the Haws 1920 bottle filler series. The reason for that, it's just very versatile. We can install these above existing drinking fountains. You can install them with new drinking fountains, or it can even be a standalone bottle filler. So it has a lot of different uses. It has white enamel or stainless steel. It's 14 gauge, so it's very vandal resistant. And then you have the two different operated options as well with hand operated or automatic touchless sensor. So this is an example of a 1920 bottle filler installed above a high-low drinking fountain. This is a fully compliant example. It's accessible to everyone. It's well within our reach ranges. And we need to make sure that it has that touchless sensor on there or a push button, so everything is compliant there. Here we have a children's high drinking fountain, or sorry, this is still your high-low standard unit. Here the bottle filler is within our 48 inches of maximum high reach range, so we're fully compliant, and it's above that low side drinking fountain. Same thing goes for this, fully compliant over the white enamel cast iron, just showing the different options for that. And then we have it above a standalone drinking fountain. So this can be installed at any of your drinking fountain heights, depending on what you need. But it has that bottle filler that matches up and it's just flush right above that drinking fountain. If we're going to be installing that type of unit as a children's side drinking fountain, we want to make sure everything's in the proper heights and proper areas. So we need our clear floor space. We need to make sure that bubbler spout is no more than 30 inches above the finished floor. In this case, it is within that reach or that spout height range. And then we need to make sure our unit is within our reach ranges for that children's height and children's use. So use that table that Justin showed earlier from the DOJ. Shows the maximum high reach ranges. In this case, If we're in that 9 to 12-year-old age range, we have a maximum high reach range of 44 inches. So this would be just below that and fully compliant. So whether it is in a public building, a commercial building, airport, college, whatever it may be, providing for easy access to all facilities by all people is our primary goal of the ADA standards. And hopefully the quick guide today has really been able to demonstrate the key standards and how to avoid getting them wrong. In this example, we have a high-low drinking fountain with a bottle filler and a chiller. It's installed in an alcove. This is in the Reno Tahoe International Airport, just down the street from the Haws headquarters. Everything is fully compliant. It's just a great example of how to install these units, make it aesthetically pleasing, place it in an alcove, and all at the proper heights. And with that, looks like the slides are getting stuck for me again. We're going to move on to poll question number 4.
All right, for poll question number 4, would you be interested in learning more about Haws hydration solutions? Let us know if you're interested in attending a product webinar or scheduling a lunch and learn. Looks like lots of you want the webinar. Got some lunch and learns. All right, going once, going twice, gonna close this poll.
All right, thank you, Kristen. So with that, we're going to move on to the Haws Hygienic Hydration Solutions, finish up with our final poll question, and then we will do the Q&A to wrap things up. I know that we only have a few minutes, so I'm going to go pretty quickly through this. Over the past few years, we have really taken an initiative to provide new hygienic and accessible hydration options. That includes touchless electric sensors, newer units, and antimicrobial surfaces on our units as well. So we're going to look at a few examples of those. With that, on the left-hand side, we have 2 of the newer units in our electric water cooler collection. The units with bubbler heads on there have antimicrobial bubbler heads. These are fully ADA compliant units. They have several smart features like bottle save counters. Everybody wants to see how many bottles they're saving, how they're saving the planet. It has a forward-thinking energy efficiency on there. It has the ability to track the filter life. It has an auto purge feature, which helps prevent Legionella or other bacteria growth by flushing those water lines. There's a full range of smart features that goes into that. They're also a lot easier to install. You can look at pictures of these units on our website. It's very clean underneath. It doesn't look like your typical electric water cooler, which really helps with that installation time. In the center, we have some standalone bottle fillers. These are ADA compliant, ideal for all types of high traffic areas, whether it's indoor, outdoor. They're constructed of durable stainless steel to help resist stains, corrosion, and also making them very vandal resistant. We know especially high schoolers are going to do everything they can think of to these units, but in all public areas, we want to make sure that we're making these units vandal resistant. Then on the right, we have our sanitary activation options. We have our antimicrobial copper push buttons, which we launched because copper is broadly recognized for its antimicrobial properties among many industries, especially in the healthcare industry. So we figured why not make the most touch surface of our drinking fountains be a little bit safer to use. And then we also have our hands-free sensors, which convert most Haws standard push button units to have a touch-free hand operation with just a simple front motion in front of that sensor. And both of those activation options can be ordered with new products up front, or they can be added to existing drinking fountains for the most part that use our standard Haws push buttons. And now we're going to go ahead and move along to our final poll question. Oh, nope, we have bottle filler stands. I forgot about those. Bottle filler stands. They are a great addition to our product line. You can add these to existing drinking fountains or order them with new ones. We're seeing a lot of states start to require bottle filler stands. This is slowly rolling out. The reason for that is it's ideal when considering somebody that has prosthetic limbs. They can now just use one limb to set down their bottle, easily fill it up. It also makes it easier for people that are using wheelchairs. They can now keep one hand on their wheelchair to keep it steady when accessing a bottle filler. That is a huge benefit and something that we really want to stress and that we're already seeing legislation come down for in certain states. So now we're going to go ahead to our final poll question. Kristen, you want to go ahead and launch this one for us?
You bet. And for our final question, it's, would you be interested in having a Haws specification manager review and update your drinking fountain bottle filler document? So I'm just going to give you a minute here to answer this.
All right. And then Hayden and I, we set some time aside uh, in both of our days so that we could just kind of dig into some questions, some answers, go over some stuff. I'm going to put the kind of final slide up here so that we can um, so you can take that information with you if you would like. So I'm going to kind of close the webinar out, and I want to thank everybody. And then Hayden and I are just going to dig into questions and answers, and just kind of go until those die off. But really quickly, just thank you very much for attending. That's the top of the hour. So everyone here at Haws, and especially Hayden and I, are really appreciative of your support and attendance. The follow-up email will be sent out very soon with the answers to the questions that were submitted in the chat, additional compliance tools, and then CEU credit instructions as well, so you can get your credits. And then please utilize the contact information on the page. If you have any questions at all, our customer service team consists of top-notch safety and hydration experts. Visit www.hawsco.com, and you can take advantage of the live chat function on there to communicate with our team if you need anything else at all. And then lastly, please take what you've learned today, go forth, share this information. Remember to be champions for compliance and universal access. And thank you very much. I really hope you enjoyed this. And so Hayden and I'm gonna pop back here real quick, and I'll dive on the first question there. If you want, these were submitted questions that we want to tackle real quick before we start. I love all the little reactions. That's cool. Clap those hands, guys. Thank you. Appreciate it. And then, so I'm going to dig into that first one real quick, and the answers to this: when providing a bottle filling station, is it required to provide a high-low drinking fountain if none is available? Right, it's really important to remember with this that bottle filling stations can't replace drinking fountains. Okay, drinking fountains are required. Bottle filling stations are an accessory. The ADA standards require that we put that high-low in there, whatever the facility is. The bottle filling station can't be used to meet that requirement. Once we've had the minimum amount of fountains in the facility, you can supplement and add as many bottle fillers as you'd like for the whole facility or park, but we have to have a minimum number that'll be pre-designated by local codes of high-low drinking fountains. Okay, very important to remember that. And that not everybody has a cup or a bottle with them. Many people are carrying them, and it's much more common. But universal access to water means drinking fountains need to be in place, and they need to be accessible. So, Hayden, why don't you grab the second question?
Yeah, so our second question today is, does this system automatically discharge on a scheduled basis to prevent bacteria, Legionella, from establishing itself? And the answer to that is our electric water cooler series does do that. Our standard units are not, but when it comes to our electric water coolers, they do have an automatic purge feature on there that is going to flush the water lines every 24 hours to prevent Legionella and other similar bacteria growth in those lines. And then I'll go ahead and take the third question here as well. That one is there a temperature requirement for drinking fountains? And again, for this one, standard drinking fountains do not have a temperature requirement. However, for refrigerated drinking fountains, there is a temperature requirement. It's not through the ADA, it's through a different acronym, but there is a required temperature range for those refrigerated drinking fountains. And refrigerated drinking fountains must have a compliant chilling capacity of 8 gallons an hour with 50-degree drinking water. And that is going to be based off of your 80-degree inlet water and for a 90-degree ambient temperature in that room as well. So there's quite a few numbers that I just threw out at you for that question, but we will be including that in the Q&A document that we send out within the next 24 to 48 hours as well.
Definitely. All right, and then if you don't mind, I'll take the last one. And so, what are the standards for testing and certification of the type of water, and how often should the unit be cleaned to mitigate illness from a shared workplace water dispenser? Just in case you got gross coworkers. Just kidding. There aren't any testing or certification requirements, right, for the water at the fountain. However, the facility will need to properly maintain their testing, their records, and site filtration if they have it. More and more fountains and bottle fillers are including filtration. Even our outdoor units have an optional filtration that can be installed now. And I think it's the U.S. agency that regulates water use quality. I think that's requirements of it's the EPA. Now, fountains should be maintained and cleaned periodically. And I can't speak for everyone, everybody else's um, models of drinking fountains out there, but we use chrome plated brass, um, which is chosen because of its resistance to corrosion and resistance to bacterial growth. Not to mention that we have those copper buttons, options for buttons, which is pretty much the gold standard for antimicrobial metals. Though so is silver, but you're not getting silver plated fountain buttons anytime soon. And then Hayden, if I just want to bounce into the questions thread here.
Yeah,
Um,
I had one that I wanted to address in there if you don't mind. I think it might be the same one that you're
I bet
talking
it's,
about.
I bet it's the
It
same
kind
one
of
I was thinking of.
Yeah, so there's about four questions in here that kind of overlap that I want to touch on. So
Go ahead.
the basic gist of it is there a grandfather clause?
I
And
knew
also
it.
talking about cane skirts, is there a grandfather clause when it comes to that? When are cane skirts required? So I'm just going to kind of touch on all of it. There is not a grandfather clause. You still have to meet the ADA standards. We talked about that earlier. So you want to keep in mind that you are meeting the ADA requirements for drinking fountains when it comes to these areas, no matter how old that building is. If it was installed or if it was built just before the ADA standards went into place, you still need to be meeting those requirements. Now, for the cane skirts need to be added if the unit is protruding into the path of travel. So if it's in an alcove, it's not sticking out of that alcove, you don't need the cane skirts. I know a lot of the examples that we showed today didn't have cane skirts on there. That is really because typically we see these installed out of the path of travel. We understand a lot of them are still installed in the path of travel. So you need to add those cane skirts to your high side drinking fountains. Anything that's above 27 inches off the finished floor, you need to bring that lower leading edge down to 27 inches. if it's protruding out more than 4 inches, which is going to be the majority of drinking fountains, or really all drinking fountains. So you need to add those on there. There's also something called a cane curb. Those can be placed on the ground directly beneath the drinking fountain, and that acts in the same way where it can be cane detected for that unit. Are those the questions that you were going to ask as well, Justin? If not, go ahead and answer whatever other ones you want to, too.
I was totally gonna jump on the grandfather clause thing because that was the first question I saw. But I do want to touch on something on that too. So not everywhere needs to be accessible,
Yes.
right? I want to give a good example. I was down in Texas for a trade show, and we popped by the Alamo. Just because it was near the convention center, it was on our walk back, and we're like, hey, let's go check it out, and we'll walk around and stuff. There were accessible amenities there on site, for wheelchair access and so on. But that main building is not ever or can never be accessible. There's no way to navigate that old building in a wheelchair. Um, and so there are historical sites, right, that don't need accessible fountains and ramps and stuff like that. But the facilities around it were accessible. So there are places that don't need to be, the third tier of a catwalk over in a pulp and paper mill around there, that big washing machine thing they use to break up all the cardboard, that doesn't need to be accessible, right? It's only the areas where reasonable access is to be granted. The other one that I wanted to kind of touch on was from Brandon up here. He sent it at 11:02. I'm hopefully still here, but he asked if a high-low unit counts as one required drinking fountain or if it counts as two drinking fountains. Each one of those units is an individual unit. So a high drinking fountain, that is one drinking fountain. A low drinking fountain, that is two drinking fountains. Um, and we're meeting our 50-50 rule, so we have one of each. Those are separate units that have been combined because that's where water access is, and it's easier to put them next to each other, so you're finding out, oh, there's a low fountain here. I need to head off down the hallway and find the high one. So that's why that's like that. You got another one?
No, I think that's really it.
Oh, okay. Well, I had one more here from Maria that I wanted to answer. And she asked, I'd like to know more about the skirts to address protruding objects. We have a lot of historic buildings where it is not possible to add an alcove. And I kind of touched on that a little bit, but um, uh, where you cannot add an alcove, wing walls can be installed. And do and really in a way that it's not really going to affect the structure in any way. They'll need to be attached to the wall and or the ground. But it's a minimal way to change the space to be accessible. Or again, depending on your local laws, you can just throw a cane skirt on there if you have a fountain or something on there. So if you have a cane skirt and you have a state that's not requiring alcoves, you can use the cane skirt to make it detectable, and with a detection cane. So thank you for asking that, Maria. And then I think that was it. Lots of compliments. I like compliments. Appreciate it, guys. Yeah, I didn't really see anything else that was a real dig in type of question. Oh, there it is. There was one other one. The maximum toe and knee height. 9 inches for toes, 27 inches for knees. It's really kind of a hard height measurement. That's the max that you're going to get away with. The toe clearance, however, it has to be. You have to provide 9 inches. The 27 inches for the knees is a hard measurement. That's it. That's what we have to meet. You don't get any excess there. But the toe clearance, if there's no, say, chiller on the bottom of the fountain, that toe clearance goes all the way up to the bottom of the fountain, right? That's that entire space. that has to be free, but you have to have a clear 9 inches. So nothing extending up from the floor, out from the wall, or down from the fountain. That has to be there and provided underneath the element. So I think that was the last one I wanted to get into.
Sounds good to me. I think we're all good on the questions today. Everybody, thank you for sticking with us. We had a solid number of you guys that stayed with us for the additional 15 minutes.
Yeah.
So thank you all for that and for sitting through the full ADA presentation with us today. We hope to see you again in the future.
Thank you, everybody. We greatly appreciate you, and we'll see you for the next one. Have a great week.